and welcome to today's webcast. We have with us Matthew Grimes of the Alberta School of Business here in Edmonton, and this is the 3I International Innovation, I'm getting it wrong, International Institute for Innovation, powered by the Innovation Expedition. Sorry, that's a lot of words, and I got them all in the wrong order. But anyway, this is our monthly webcast series, second in the series, leading up to our big launch in September, when we will be launching the full platform, which will have much more content and opportunities for interaction. So keep in touch and watch for that. But today we are talking about waste not, want not, and the competitive advantage hidden in your trash pile with Professor Grimes, also sometimes apparently known as Grimes, but we're going to call him Matthew today. I just wanted to let you know, quick housekeeping note, that the box on your screen for comments, you're perfectly welcome and in fact encouraged to use that to interject at any point. I will get a signal from the crew here in the studio that there is a question, and I'll work it into our conversation when I feel it's a good time. So last month we heard that some people felt uncomfortable, felt like they might be interrupting, but please don't even hesitate. If you have a question or a comment, type it right into that box, and we will absolutely work it in if we're able. So to get on with today's fascinating topic, welcome.
Thank you.
Thanks for joining us.
Absolutely.
And so Matthew is a professor at the Alberta School of Business. As I mentioned, he specializes in the intersection of social change and enterprise, and correct me if I get any of this wrong, but he's also an Oxford scholar and does a lot of research as well as teaching. That's fair? That fair? Okay. I get nervous with introductions because I don't want to read a resume, but at the same time, I don't want to misrepresent you. So your field of study is all about, as I said, the intersection between business and social change, and I'd like to hear from you, based on your experience, what are some of the common motivators for people to get involved in social responsibility efforts? I'm thinking specifically of organizations. Like why do they want to do this? What is the sort of business case for?
Yeah, so I think at a general level, the motivations for companies to get involved in social responsibility endeavors, it starts with leaders changing their perceptions of what contributes to success, that there's a broader set of stakeholders that they need to be accountable to. So success is not just a matter of optimizing a math problem, increasing top line revenue growth, minimizing cost of goods sold, but it's really about connecting with a variety of constituents ranging from their consumers to their employees to public policymakers to the community around them. And that's not to say that those connections don't ultimately impact the bottom line. In fact, it's quite the opposite. To the extent that an organization is able to connect with or improve public perceptions of what they're doing, that's certainly going to affect their revenues. To the extent that they're able to connect with the employee base, that's certainly going to lower their turnover costs and potentially increase their revenues associated with increased productivity. But I would say this too. I think a lot of the motivations for corporate social responsibility are actually much more idiosyncratic. So, it may be that a founder of a company has been touched by a particular cause over time, and they want to associate the success of their company with those specific causes. So I think there's both those general factors that motivate the conversation, but then also a lot of the motivation comes idiosyncratically through the founder's experiences.
Even in a big, publicly traded company or a government department or something?
I think so. If you look at the influence of founders throughout time, even if you look at a company that's 100 years old, founders have the capacity to imprint onto an organization in a very radical way. Yeah, and so there's actually it's very difficult for organizations to change over time. There's a lot of inertia that organizations feel, and so the impact of founders, whether it's today or whether it's 100 years ago, still remains. And so you'll see causes that are associated with the founders that have perpetuated throughout time.
But what about, and I know you specialize in business, but a government department, for example, doesn't have a founder, or does it in a way?
Fair enough. I mean, that's very true. I mean, I would look at government as quite separate. I mean, the motivations for why governments do things, often has to do with changing public perception, and so not that government is not also subject to the challenges of inertia. I mean, they certainly are as well.
But I mean, they have an employee base, and they have, if not customers per se, they have populations that they're serving. And
that's right, yeah.
And so the first things that you mentioned would apply to them as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
Turnover costs and,
yes.
and public perception.
Absolutely.
Yeah, okay. All right. So what are some of the biggest challenges that they tend to, like when an organization is working to become more socially responsible, what do you see as the major roadblocks that they tend to come up against?
I think the primary challenges that organizations face with respect to getting involved in corporate social responsibility generally fall into three main buckets, ranging from the economic issues to social issues to organizational issues. From an economic standpoint, CSR and social interventions that for-profit or government-based organizations are getting involved with, it costs money. And so if your margins are small, that's going to limit your capacity, or it's going to limit your perceived capacity to get involved in some of these things. Socially, the conversation around corporate social responsibility is, highly value-laden. It's inherently value-laden. And in that sense, the conversations that are going to happen within organizations are going to be very politically charged. So leaders are going to come to the table with different sets of ideas of what the role of, for example, for-profit organizations is within society with respect to social interventions. And even if they can come to some consensus or agreement about that fundamental issue, there still may be dramatic differences in terms of how, what issues they see as particularly important, what issues they see as aligning best with the core competencies of the organization. So, and then organizationally, the challenges are associated with, oftentimes a lot of to the extent that organizations are involved in CSR, they are often motivated by a sense of how are we going to improve the brand or image of the company or organization with the public, and for that reason, it often gets these activities and the leaders that are associated with those activities often get placed within and under the marketing organization. And it's very difficult for them to gain a seat at the executive table where these conversations around social and environmental responsibility can be integrated into the core strategic conversations that happen at the C level.
So it's treated as something that's off the side of the plate of the main business.
Unfortunately, that's been my perception of what a lot of the cases out there.
And that then limits the organization's ability to
think strategically about this. It becomes something where it's like, okay, what are the one-off projects that we can do on the side to improve the brand or image or recognition of or reputation of the company or the organization.
Mm-hmm. Well, that certainly sounds familiar to me. I know exactly what you mean. This is something that we sort of do everywhere, right? Social good is over there and real life is over here, and it's kind of counterproductive. But anyway, meanwhile, every organization pretty much and household and entity generates some sort of waste. Yeah. Unfortunately, or maybe fortunately, depending on what you're going to explain to us today. So when you talk about waste, you're not just talking about garbage. You are talking about a broader definition of waste. Is that right? Like, you don't just mean like what goes to landfill.
Right. I mean, I think when people hear the term waste, they immediately go towards garbage bins and landfills. But and waste is a liability. It's treated as something that you're trying to dispose of. It's treated as something that you need to bury and forget about. Go away
and disappear, and not come back, and then we hope we don't think about it again.
That's right. And it's very rarely thought of within the context of entrepreneurial opportunity. But waste, as you've noted, is a much broader set of things. We've got wasted capital, wasted effort, wasted talent, wasted information, wasted consumer product goods, et cetera. And when you shift the conversation to those broader sets of waste, I think it's much more easy to begin thinking about the ways that you can convert waste into opportunity.
And so, but we're not excluding the stereotypical definition of waste, right? Like, we still also mean garbage.
Right. So to the extent that, consumer product goods, you're disposing of those things, or material waste is still a factor in what we would define as waste, for sure. Yes. And
so when waste isn't treated as a resource, it's a liability, as you say. So, can you maybe expand on that a little bit?
Sure.
How does waste cost us? How is it bad for us to just, put it in a pile or ignore the fact that there's wasted talent and opportunity in it?
So maybe it'd be useful to put this in context. So every production system has an input stage where there's goods that are inputted into the system. There's a transformation process, usually by way of some technology that converts those inputs into some sort of marketable goods or services. Then those goods and services get sold and consumed and then disposed of. So when most people think about waste, if I were to ask people which of those stages are most associated with waste, they would say, oh, absolutely, it's the last stage. It's the disposal stage.
Of course.
The reality is that waste is prevalent throughout the whole production system, from the inputs. And so take, for example, the inputs where, energy is one of the primary inputs that goes into most production systems across the globe. And we've built those production systems around non-renewable, scarce fossil fuels as opposed to renewable, non-scarce alternative energy sources. And so clearly there's an opportunity, a missed opportunity to capitalize on what is now essentially wasted, scarce resources. And if I were to ask people what is the cost, or what's the value of that waste throughout the production system, they would likely say, well, it's zero or it's negative, right? It's negative value.
It's a downside. Like you said, it's a liability.
Right. But there are clearly other opportunities to think about waste as it more broadly as a source of opportunity. So, just sticking with the material waste side of things, let's take, for example, the Alberta oil and gas industry, right? So within the oil and gas industry, the oil sands conversion process has a waste product. That waste product is known as petroleum coke. And so petroleum coke is being stockpiled in 100 millions of tons by the companies within that industry. And it's being stockpiled because it's viewed as, there's no environmentally sound way of disposing of it. Unfortunately, it's also an environmental liability in the sense that it's a air pollutant. And so the whole industry views this as an incredible issue for which they have no real sense of how to dispose of that liability. But that perception has created opportunities for interesting new startups to emerge who actually view that as an opportunity, as a potential asset, not a liability. So there's a startup at the University of Alberta that's called Alta Carbon. The team has developed a patent-pending method of basically converting this petroleum coke into activated carbon. Now, activated carbon is a multi-billion-dollar market, and activated carbon serves as a as an air and water purifier rather than an air and water pollutant.
Really?
Yes. So they've basically figured out a cost-effective means of taking what is a waste byproduct of the production system in the oil sands process, and they've converted it into a source of potential great economic value to the company and to this region, but also in a way that is going to deal with some of these environmental and social liabilities associated with petroleum coke.
So it's socially responsible, and it's profitable.
That's right.
And it's environmentally responsible. So
Right.
this is, I remember when this subject came up when we were talking preparatory to this session, I had said to you, is there any way that companies can be more, or organizations I should say, be more socially responsible and positively impact the bottom line at the same time? And this is what you said, like, yes, under certain conditions, you said,
Right.
Waste can be seen as a resource, and that is a huge opportunity. So it makes a lot of sense, obviously, when we're talking about material waste.
Right.
But if I were, for example, working at a bank or I don't know, some sort of service organization, a hotel maybe, I would say, okay, that's all very well and good, but my business doesn't produce mountains of carbon or whatever.
Right.
So how does this apply to organizations that are not about manufacturing and that don't have the clear sort of input, process, output cycle?
Right. So I think it's useful within the service-based industry to think about waste metaphorically and not just materially. So, materially, obviously, service-based businesses like a bank are going to produce far less material waste than a manufacturing operation. But that said, if we think again about, as I've noted, waste as essentially liabilities that we're trying to dispose of that have no commercial value. Well, historically within the banking sector, for example, poor people were viewed typically as a liability. They were a liability to the lending process because there was this perception that poor people were more likely to default on their loans. So the assumption was that then they have no commercial value. In fact, they're potentially a commercial liability. So you just don't loan to poor individuals. But in the 1970s, the Grameen Bank and a couple other microfinance organizations came around and started challenging that notion and saying, no, poor people are not the waste byproduct of this industry. They're not only deserving of loans, but they should, ethically they should be part of this, and they're a financial opportunity for us. So they began, the change was dramatic. So hundreds of millions of people were lifted out of poverty.
Were they though? I've read conflicting, like some say it's too early to tell, some say it isn't the miracle cure that it's touted as. So
there are certainly issues associated with it, ranging from who they're particularly trying to serve. Are they trying to serve the absolute people living in extreme poverty? Are they serving people in the middle class, lower middle class within regions? But I mean, if you look at Bangladesh, pre-Grameen Bank and pre-BRAC, which is another organization that started up around the same time, lending to poor individuals, you recognize that, that entire country, it was a natural experiment essentially for microfinance, and we now see the massive benefits that have taken place. I mean, if you look at the trajectory of GDP in that region, prior to that intervention, it was much lower than once those microfinance interventions came into play. It had dramatic effects. New markets started opening up at the base of the pyramid as entrepreneurs were taking this money and then generating.
The base of the pyramid is
base of the wealth pyramid, yeah. Okay. So
lots of people with not a lot of money.
That's right.
Okay.
Precisely, yeah. And then in addition, these organizations were doing quite well financially, to the point where commercial banks were now starting to say, hey, this is a huge...
The tiny little organizations that were receiving the microfinance.
Sorry. So Grameen Bank and the microfinance organizations.
The loan making.
Yes, precisely. So those organizations that were actively lending to these what was previously thought of as commercial liability individuals.
And they're lending to them for business purposes, right? Is that
yes,
just to make sure we're
right.
clear on what we mean by microfinance? Like,
so
borrowers are small, maybe 1 or 2 person businesses,
right?
And the loans are just tiny, right?
Right. So yes, typically they're very, very small, and they're typically attached to small micro enterprises that the individuals are launching on the flip side of the loans. Those loans are provided to the groups rather than to the individuals, and the groups then disperse them to specific individuals. Okay. So the groups are made up of a variety of entrepreneurs.
And sort of supportive, like, circles.
That's right. Yeah. That's right. It also helps to decentralize the governance, so the groups actually help manage the distribution process, and they create normative pressure for people to repay. So it helps resolve some of the issues that I mentioned before around the assumptions around defaults. So that normative pressure of your peers saying, "Hey, you need to repay that loan, or else we're not going to get paid. We're not going to get our loans."
So it wasn't as simple as just saying, hey, here's a bunch of people we're not lending to. That's a waste we can turn into profit and lending to them. There has to be... There
was an innovation there.
Yeah, you have to be sort of smart about it.
That's right. So there's an initial challenging of the particular latent assumptions that we might have around, poor people are undeserving of loans, right? Or they're unqualified for loans. But then beyond that, there's an innovation component required as well.
So that reminds me of something else that you had said to me in our previous discussion, which was that something to the effect that this isn't just a silver bullet. This waste thing isn't just going to make every organization that applies it into a magical, wonderful, perfectly socially responsible. There are conditions. Right. It only really applies in certain situations. So can you maybe share with us what those?
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to oversell it, and I also don't want to be too abstract here, but the activity or the domains in which this type of capacity to convert waste into an opportunity, it has to meet 2 conditions. Well, the first is that there needs to be excess supply on one hand and excess demand on the other hand. So if you look at the Alta Carbon example, you had excess supply of petroleum coke on one hand and excess demand for activated carbon on the other. Within the microfinance example, you have excess capital on one hand, an excess supply of capital on one hand, and an excess demand for working capital or loans on the other hand. And
how did they know they had excess capital? I'm not familiar with any areas where there's more money than we need.
Well, in the banking sector, it's flush with cash. It's just a question of where you invest, right?
Oh, okay.
So there you're basically saying, like, what's the best place to invest this massive amount of capital that we have floating around?
Okay.
So you've got excess supply of capital. So essentially you've got a distribution problem. You've got excess supply, excess demand, but you haven't figured out how to match the 2 up. And that brings me to the second condition, which is there needs to be a cost-effective technological solution, or at least the possibility of a cost-effective technological solution to solve that distribution problem.
When you say technology, you don't just mean machines, because...
I don't mean just machines,
okay,
right?
Yeah.
Right.
Like in manufacturing, it probably is, but right. with the other more metaphorical types of waste.
Right. So in the banking sector, the technological innovation was the group lending process, right? So it's a different method of converting the input, the capital, into outputs, which is a loan, right? A loan process. So a good example of a setting where this probably wouldn't work would be like, So there's wasted solar energy on the sunny side of the moon, right?
Okay.
Now we could hypothetically say, all right, the world governments are going to come together. We're going to be committed to building. We're going to just cover the moon with solar panels, capture all that solar energy, and bring it back to planet Earth, right? Now that would be dealing with issues of excess supply on one hand, excess demand. The unfortunate thing is the cost associated with doing so, at least at this point in time, would be so astronomical that it would outweigh the benefits of actually capturing that waste.
Yeah.
So clearly, there has to be a cost-effective means of connecting everything. Mm-hmm. Now, in the Alta Carbon example, they've developed their patent-pending approach is so cost-effective that it improves upon the industry standard. So they've not just come up with a way of taking this environmental liability and converting it into an opportunity, but they've done so with a technology that is so cost effective that their margins are going to be more substantial than anybody else in their industry.
You mean more substantial than people that are just disposing of it?
Well, no, more substantial than the alternative methods of producing activated carbon.
Oh, I see. Okay.
So within the activated carbon market, there are various ways of producing that activated carbon. Their method for doing so is actually more cost effective. So they resolve that excess demand problem in a way that is more cost effective than the market standards, therefore creating a lot of financial opportunity.
So if I'm in an organization and I'm looking around and I'm thinking, is this something that I should consider? A big clue would be if it's costing me money to dispose of something. Or if I have a gap where I can't get enough of something, like perhaps workers.
Right.
Would that be fair to say?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, so another example of this is within the pharmaceutical industry. There's massive costs associated with disposing of pharmaceutical waste, and in this case, it's expired drugs, right? Mm-hmm. Or drugs that are closer towards their expiry date. And there are organizations out there, startups out there that have figured out that they've looked at that and said, okay, there's excess supply on one hand, this wasted byproduct from the pharmaceutical production process, and then there are all these clinics all throughout North America that are in need of cheap pharmaceuticals. Mm-hmm. These drugs are not expired; they're just approaching their expiry date. So if you can basically take what is viewed as a liability, a major cost associated with the pharmaceutical industry, and figure out ways of distributing that to people that demand, a just-in-time solution for providing pharmaceuticals to their clients, then you can actually profit from resolving these potential environmental and social issues of waste.
Right. Are there any other examples that you could, like, a lot of these examples that we're talking about are of entire organizations that arise to be the intermediary between the waste and the demand. But do you know of some companies where they have internally leveraged this? Yeah, I wish I did. And so,
maybe it's not a fair question. So part of that may be the fact that, most of my work deals in the domain of startups. Part of it may be that organizations just really aren't that good at looking at their waste and saying, hey, we've got an opportunity here. Mm-hmm. My guess is that it's probably a bit of both. Mm-hmm. So one example of a company that's doing some interesting things in this area, a larger organization would be Coca-Cola.
I saw that in your notes and I thought, what? Aren't they, evil? Aren't we supposed to hate them and drink their beverages against our better judgment?
Right. So I'm not going to get into that side of things, but
but I got to hear this, though. I want to know.
Yeah, they're quite innovative in the sense that so they've got two different initiatives ongoing right now. One is basically they are distributing these solar powered coolers to women entrepreneurs across emerging economies, and they're doing it for free. So they're distributing these coolers, and they're recouping their costs because these individuals are then, these women entrepreneurs are then able to chill their beverages, sell more beverages, and then I think their initial test, Coke was able to show something like 5 times the profit coming to the women entrepreneurs as well as back to them. So it's not just that these women entrepreneurs are able to profit more because they now have coolers, but these solar powered coolers also provide free electricity that powers a lot of their store, their mobile devices, et cetera. And then Coke also couples that with workforce development training efforts that help them to maximize their revenue and grow their businesses.
So the waste in this case was
low-income, wasted talent,
small entrepreneurs that were underutilized.
You got wasted energy in that situation, wasted talent, wasted inventory. So there's a variety of different issues of waste there. Another thing that they're doing is, so Coca-Cola has built out this unbelievable distribution network to remote populations. To the point where a lot of NGOs, they haven't been able to figure out how to develop similar cost-effective means of getting, for example, life-saving drugs out to these remote populations. So they've been partnering now with Coca-Cola, basically taking advantage of the wasted spare capacity within the carts that were transferring Coca-Cola products, and basically packaging the small wasted compartments of those carts with the life-saving drugs. So so it empowers retail entrepreneurs in those remote regions that are then going on to basically take those life-saving drugs and whatever other types of consumer products and then distribute and sell those to the remote population. So, that's one of the more innovative ones that I've heard of. I
heard our last month's guest Mark Anielski spoke about Interface Carpeting, which I'm not sure how familiar you are with them, but that comes to mind because they are a carpet tile manufacturer. And in their efforts to become more socially responsible, they've set up a program where their customers return used carpet to them, and they break it down and use it for raw materials instead of using virgin raw materials, and they found it to be very profitable. So that's probably, for straight up manufacturing example, that one's probably, I'm not sure, I'm not
There's
an expert,
another, this is totally off the top of my head, but there's so I know Trader Joe's is a kind of a boutique, maybe that's unfair, but they're a large chain of grocery stores, but they sort of operate in kind of a boutique market, selling organic produce, et cetera.
Like Whole Foods.
A little bit smaller though, much smaller. And apparently one of the people, the leaders in that organization within the United States, I believe, saw all the food waste that was just rampant. The amount of food that
I
is.
used to work for a food distributor. It's insane.
It's absolutely insane.
They call it shrink for some reason, but
So when you've got again clear excess supply, excess demand, you've got malnourished, starving people on one hand, all kinds of food waste on the other hand, right? Tons and tons. And so, and a lot of that food waste, at least within the retail sector, it gets thrown away at a point at which it's just approaching expiry dates. It has nothing to do with.
But it's seen as a straight loss.
It's seen as a straight loss, right? Yeah. And so this leader within that sector has then gone on to basically look. I think he's founded a new organization. So it wasn't necessarily a change within, but he saw the opportunity as somebody within the organization, within the industry, went off to found a new organization that's basically helping to deal with some of these issues, again, while making a profit in doing so.
That's great. So going back to the reasons that organizations do these kinds of things in the first place, how does all of this that we've been talking about, how does it help us with perhaps not the founder element, but more the turnover, retention, employee relations, all this stuff that we said at the beginning was the reason that organizations would do this in the first place. How does this all help us there?
So with respect to employee relations, I mean, it's interesting. I think a lot of CSR advocates associated with a lot of CSR advocates focus their push for companies to basically make work a little less unbearable, right? How do we make work suck less for the laborers? And
let's get less evil.
Right.
I think a friend of mine said to me yesterday.
So, I came across an article a couple weeks back where several French labor unions had engaged with several French companies to convince them to basically mandate that employees were not allowed to respond to emails past 6 p.m. at night, right? So, and everybody's like, oh, this is so great. Work-life balance. I get it. I understand that that's important. On the other hand, I talk to a variety of students on a daily basis who are searching for work. They're not searching for easier or less time-intensive work. They're searching for meaningful work. They're searching for work that they believe aligns with their sense of their identity, their sense of values, and what they believe companies should be doing in terms of making a difference in the world. And so to the extent that companies can do that, can integrate social and environmental responsibility into the core facets of the strategy of their organization, the core business model, it's going to attract, in my opinion, it's probably going to attract and retain a lot of individuals or help with that process.
Probably make them better employees while they're there.
Potentially, right. So increasing productivity. If my identity is aligned with my work, it's highly likely that I'm going to put more effort into it.
Yeah.
In terms of customer or consumer and press relations, this whole conversation around conscious consumerism is on the rise right now, and there's a lot of interest in companies that are at the intersection. Or that can position themselves at the intersection of entrepreneurship and philanthropy. So again, to the extent that you can do that, it's more likely that you're going to be able to differentiate yourself in the consumer landscape. It's more likely that media is going to be attracted to you as a potential story.
Yeah.
So I think that...
Yeah, I think media is a little tired of the ribbon cuttings and the fun run sponsorships.
Right.
I know some people in media, and they're like, if I get one more pitch about this same old stuff,
right.
And it's not different, as you say.
Right. So if there are innovative ways, and I mean, what's more innovative than taking something that is currently viewed as a liability and a loss, and converting that into a profitable opportunity? I mean, there are very few things that I can see as more innovative than that.
Mm-hmm. What about, so we've been talking organizations, but we all, like the people who are joining us and you and I, we're also individuals, and we have households and we have personal lives. So does this, just quickly right here at the end of our conversation, can we maybe touch on how it might apply to a person's daily life?
Sure. So I think, in terms of inputs, we can go back to energy as a potential conversation, right? Where if you're relying on scarce, non-renewable fossil fuels, there are potential ways of changing those patterns at even at the local consumer level, at the level of the home. And then, in terms of outputs, again, this whole idea is that, there's that common idiom, which is one man's trash is another man's treasure.
Yeah.
within this conversation, we could reframe it to say there's overlooked market value to what you perceive as waste, right? And so, to the extent that you can look at the waste that your home unit is producing, and think about who and which organizations, which individuals in society may value those wasted items.
So is it as simple as composting, recycling, giving to thrift shops, buying used?
Sure. I mean, that's.
Am I oversimplifying?
No, I think that's right. I mean, and I think maybe potentially a more innovative way of looking at this would be look at your time. Look at the amount of time that you waste. Look at your weekends and your evenings, and think about how you spend your capacity, your initiative, your intelligence, your ability to produce great things in the world. How are you using that? How can you convert that from wasted time and energy into something that makes a dent in the universe,
Oh, how subversive of you. You've now turned all of us into more likely to be that person that wants meaning at work.
Right, yes.
Because if we're working and it's not meaningful and we're not making a dent in the universe, then that's waste, isn't it?
I would say so.
Yeah.
I would say so, yeah.
All right. Well, thank you very much for a fascinating conversation.
Absolutely.
I appreciate your time today.
Thanks for having me.
And I appreciate your time. And I'm not sure if I mentioned my name at all so far. My name is Nadine Riopel. I'm the director of the Center for Social Responsibility here at the 3i International Institute for Innovation. And we will be doing another webcast next month on, I believe it's May 28th. And the subject will be disaster management and risk management, and how organizations can prevent becoming splashed all over the headlines, which is terrible for social responsibility. So please join me then. We'll be sending out a link, and also on our website we will have all the information for how to register for that, and you can keep up with us all the way until the fabulous launch in September of the full platform. So thank you again for your time, and you can visit us at innovationexpedition.com, and I'll hope to see you next month.